It is difficult to feed the 8 billion people in the world. Food and calories are the basis of human civilization. However, there is only a limited amount of naturally fertile land. Plants need three things to grow: sunlight, water, and nutrients. Although humans are unable to control sunlight, nutrients and water are. Some land, however, is unfarmable for obvious reasons. The majority of the world's land is semi-arid or arid, which covers 41% of the world's land surface. In these areas, water and nutrients are scarce and plants are unable to grow. Plants are very fragile and will die if there are abnormalities. One of these, known as drought, has plagued human civilization for thousands of years and has altered the course of history and still affects many today. Most of the semi-arid land in the world, with some water and nutrients, is farmable. The nutrients can be supplied by fertilizer. The water can be supplied by controlled amounts of water to the surface. This process, known as irrigation, is as important as fertilizer for the growth and development of human civilization. There are many types of irrigation with many perspectives. Here are some image examples of irrigation. Irrigation is the process of applying controlled amounts of water to land to grow crops. It allows crops to grow and help them survive through harsh conditions. Irrigation can also be used to protect plants from frost and clear weeds from fields. Water can warm plants and kill most weeds. Irrigation is about as old as agriculture. Some irrigation systems are several thousand years old. Irrigation contributed to the rise and fall of empires. There are many types of irrigation systems in the world. Types of irrigation include surface irrigation, surge irrigation, micro irrigation, sprinkler irrigation, drip irrigation, and sub-irrigation. Irrigation ranges from entire rivers diverted into hundreds of square kilometers to watering a potted plant. Surface irrigation is the most primitive type of irrigation. Surface irrigation uses gravity to distribute water. Types of surface irrigation includes basin irrigation, furrow irrigation, border irrigation, and spate irrigation. Basin irrigation uses a flattened piece of land with a slight slope. Surrounding the basin are dikes and levees that restrict water to flow out. The water is left to pond for a while to irrigate the crops. The water is drained from the bottom. Basin irrigation is most efficient in soils with low infiltration rates. Basin irrigation has to be managed properly or crops will drown. One basin can be redirected to flow into another. The best crop for basin irrigation is rice. Rice is one of the most common crops in the world. However, rice is extremely delicate to weeds. Fortunately, rice is able to survive partially submerged underwater for periods of time. Its counterparts, weeds, are not. In a rice paddy, weeds are drowned and the rice plant survives. Rice is also a very water-demanding crop and will die if there are pesticides. Many crops are planted in uplifted rows. There are indentations between these rows. Water is filled in those rows, irrigating the crops. Furrow irrigation has also been used since ancient time. Row crops, such as corn and cotton, are favorable for furrow irrigation. The image shown is an example of furrow irrigation. Furrow irrigation is essentially basin irrigation, but plants are not submerged in water to prevent disease and the rot of roots. However, furrow irrigation is very water intensive and there is a significant amount of water waste. Border irrigation, also known as strip irrigation, is a method very similar to basin irrigation. Instead of completely surrounding a plot of land with dikes and levees, the bottom is open, allowing water to freely flow out of. Furthermore, the strip irrigated plot is divided into several different strips by a mound to better control the water. The strip is generally around 10 meters across. The strips exist to prevent water from becoming a delta while flowing and becoming unable to irrigate most of the field. It can be irrigated in strips. In fact, border irrigation can also include the row crops of furrow irrigation in the interior. Spate irrigation is the process of surface irrigation in semi-arid regions. It is generally found in places such as the Middle East and North Africa. Spate irrigation utilizes temporary seasonal floods as a water source. Water is diverted into ephemeral rivers, which is basically a fancy word for artificial channels, into fields. The water in that field continues downward to the next field. A spate is used to channel off a river. An elongated section elevates with rock and dirt blocks most of the river. The position of the spate can be used to direct water runoff. Water is diverted from one field to the next field and can continue to irrigate to many kilometers. Spate irrigation was the earliest form of irrigation. However, there is much uncertainty over the process of spate irrigation. If the flood is too large, the channels will be overwhelmed and destroyed. If the floods are too small, the water would not be sufficient to irrigate. Furthermore, the process of the distribution of water is very hard and requires extensive builds of dams, levees, dikes, and mounds to control water. Spate irrigation is found in semi-arid regions due to the fact that these regions receive little rainfall and the floods are largely concentrated in one area. This type of climate is also known as a monsoon, but it may occur in places that are different. Much of the world's spate irrigation is found in Africa, making the danger of unpredictable flooding due to climate change a risk for billions of people. Surge irrigation is relatively similar to surface irrigation. It is hard to distribute water over length of the field. Surge irrigation uses technology that forces pressurized water out of a long horizontal pipe into several basins, similar to border irrigation and furrow irrigation. The image shown is a perfect example of surge irrigation. The method of water distribution, however, is different from surface irrigation as it involves the use of mechanical power and pressure, not gravity. Sprinkler irrigation is irrigation that uses sprinklers. A sprinkler, a definition does seem irrelevant though, is a device that injects controlled amounts of pressurized water in a controlled direction through a valve and nozzle in the device. The water from a sprinkler is in a manner similar to rainfall. Sprinklers range in size from backyard sprinklers to industrial scale sprinklers. An industrial sprinkler, as shown, is a long line of arches on many wheels. There is a rod with numerous sprinklers attached. The sprinkler, an entire chain of rollers several hundred meters across, rolls over the field, irrigating it. However, sprinklers do not reduce the waste of water. Contrary to what many people think, the plant watered by industrial sprinklers are not coming from getting hit by jets of water, but mist from the sprinkler systems. This is also why sprinklers waste so much water. The water is diverted into the air and can be blown away. Micro-irrigation is a relatively sustainable new technology. Micro-irrigation, as the name suggests, uses low water pressure and the natural flow of water. Micro-irrigation is generally tubing that sprawls around a field. Contrary to sprinklers, which shoots water into the air, micro-irrigation flows on the ground. This benefits plants better as it only waters the roots. This also significantly reduces the waste of water. Micro-irrigation can also be used similar to sprinklers, but at a small level. Micro-sprinklers range in all sorts, from drip systems to sub-sprinklers. Sub-sprinklers are basically underground. Micro-irrigation can also be applied underground, as said before. Drip irrigation is a new technology. conventional methods waste a lot of water. Drip irrigation uses a nozzle aimed at the roots of the plants. Drip irrigation, although very costly for developing countries to set up, is growing in popularity in developed countries for its efficiency and for the environment. Drip irrigation doesn't blow water towards crops, it just drips. Though drip irrigation and micro irrigations are frequently mixed up, they are different things. Micro irrigation sometimes does have a little bit of sprinkler irrigation, and drip irrigation is purely just dripping water, it doesn't involve continuous flow. Surface irrigation and maybe sprinkler irrigation are examples of conventional methods of irrigation. Surface irrigation and sprinkler irrigation are inefficient in water consumption, and sprinkler irrigation allows weeds to grow and unevenly waters a field. Using supercomputers, that can be avoided. Surface irrigation is notorious for many ecological disasters from the drainage of rivers. However, surface irrigation and sprinkler irrigation, like fossil fuels in the energy sector, are still the main type of irrigation. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. The Aral Sea was, it's not is, but was, the fourth largest lake in the world. Its remnants, notice, remnants, are now on the border between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. The Aral Sea in 1960 spanned 68,000 square kilometers, the fourth largest lake in the world at the time. The Aral Sea was an endorheic lake. An endorheic lake is a lake with no major outlet. Since it had no major outlet, the Aral Sea was a saline lake, a lake that had salt water. All withdrawals from the lake are in the form of evaporation, allowing salt to build up. Under Stalin, the Soviet Union embarked on an ambitious project known as the Northern River Reversal, a plan to divert the northern rivers, for example the Ob, the Yelency, and the Lena, into Central Asia, which would be able to support up to 200 million people. The destruction of the Aral Sea was part of the project's consequences. Central Asia involves the countries Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. Soviet Union. This is the Amu Darya. To be honest though, that lake over there is completely infested with mining tailings and basically nothing lives there. The Amu Darya begins with the meltwater from the mountains of Tajikistan. As the largest river in Central Asia, it used to flow into the Aral Sea. The Amu Darya, along with the Sirdarya Darya, was the main flow into the Aral Sea, accounting for like 99.5%. At least, it used to. Uzbekistan SSR had an abundance of arid land unfavorable to farming. The Northern River Reversal Project had the Amu Darya floodplain into northern Uzbekistan, known as Karal Kapakstan, to grow cotton and other fruits. Cotton is a very water-intensive crop, and the species of choice of the Soviet Union was even more water-intensive. Uzbekistan rapidly turned from a poor member state of the Soviet Union, suffering from famine, to the world's largest producer of cotton in 1986, producing 3.5 million tons of cotton annually. There was also forced labor involved, but that's not very important. Along production has decreased, Uzbekistan is today the 8th largest exporter of cotton, accounting for 17% of its GDP. To date, Uzbekistan's population numbers 38 million, more than half of the Central Asian population of 72 million. Uzbekistan is the richest country in Central Asia, which is miraculous as Uzbekistan is the only country in the world that is totally surrounded by landlocked countries. Though Uzbekistan benefited, the RLC did not. With no inlet, the RLC began evaporating. It split in two by 1992, decreased to 10% its original size in 2006, and by 2007, the RLC became four small lakes along western side, the main original basin, and two lakes in the north. The shrinking of the RLC was also a huge ecological disaster. Dozens of species of fish native to the RLC went extinct. Also was a native RLC beaver. Along with it was the Sirdaria sturgeon, one of the few sturgeon extinctions in the last 100 years. The Sirdaria sturgeon is in the top list of some of the most wanted species on Earth, as some people in Central Asia speculate it still may exist. The Amudarya sturgeon, pictured, is extinct in the wild. Kazakhstan also suffered. The destruction of the RLC completely destroyed the fishing industry of Kazakhstan. Furthermore, the RLC bed is filled with toxic materials that threaten entire villages in southern Kazakhstan. Drinking water is also very hard to come by, and many children are suffering from cognitive issues caused by unclean drinking water. The island of Rebirth, formerly in the RLC, was discovered to host a secret Soviet bioweapons factory, which contained anthrax bacteria, which was discovered only recently. When the RLC shrunk, villages were abandoned and their fishing boats were also left to rot. Today, in the Karakalum Desert, the dried basin of the RLC, abandoned ship graveyards spot the flat landscape. It is hard to imagine that this place used to be a thriving fishing village. In an effort to save the North Aral Sea, the government of Kazakhstan built the giant 12-kilometer Kakoral Dam, one of the largest dams in Central Asia. It prevented the outflow of the North Aral Sea into the Karakalum Desert and preserved the Sirdarya inflow. The Sirdarya flowed into the North Aral Sea and unprotected. The Kakoral Dam, the water in the North Aral Sea would just flow into the Karakalum Desert. In several years, the North Aral Sea had expanded, deepened by almost double, and allowed Kazakhstan fishing industry to return. Native species appeared, and the restoration process is going very well. It is unlikely, sadly, that Uzbekistan will restore the main lobe of the Aral Sea. Its cotton industry is very important and has found massive amounts of natural gas in the former Aral Sea. What will happen to the Aral Sea? Pakistan. Pakistan is home to 230 million people. Its Middle Eastern counterparts have less. Iran, 80 million. Afghanistan, 25 million. Tajikistan, 8 million. Kyrgyzstan, 7 million. Why? The Indus River is a river that runs through Pakistan. It starts in the mountain in the north of Pakistan and flows south into the Indian Ocean. The Indus River Valley is rich in fertile land. Pakistan is one of the most irrigation-intensive countries in the world, as shown, with more than 50% of its land irrigated. It is only behind Suriname and Bangladesh. Pakistan, contrary to common beliefs, is not mountain wasteland. Okay, its northern mountains are. Yet where most people live are along the Indus River Valley, where there are fertile plains created by a sophisticated system of water control and diversion from the Indus River. A series of dams and canals run through Pakistan. Pakistan's irrigation system has existed for 6,500 years and has developed much in the last century. As a result, Pakistan's population is one of the world's largest in the world. Literally 95% of Pakistan's population lives in the highlighted regions. And you can see that a very complex method of irrigation flows from the Indus River and spans into numerous canals that flow through the entire Pakistan's place. Somalia. Somalia is plagued by droughts and famine. It is a very poor country in the Horn of Africa, suffering from extreme droughts that caused widespread famine and civil wars that have been ongoing for decades. 99.5% of the total freshwater withdrawals in Somalia is for agriculture, the highest in the world. This is due to the fact that Somalia has no other infrastructure that uses water on a mass scale. Almost none of Somalia's water is safe to drink. There are similarly high numbers, yet no one comes close to Somalia. The severe droughts in 2017 left 6 million people with food shortages, 1.4 million people are 1.4 million children are malnutrition. The severe drought in 2017 left 6 million people with food shortages, 1.4 million children are malnutritioned, half a million people have been internally displaced. The lack of potable water was a challenge for millions of people. A cholera diarrhea epidemic outbreak occurred, causing at least 5,000 deaths. Half a million people have been internally displaced. The lack of potable water was a challenge for millions of people. A cholera diarrhea epidemic occurred again, causing at least 5,000 deaths. The drought that started in 2021 is ongoing. 7 million faced food shortages, 1.4 million children are malnourished, 1.5 million people are displaced. At least 10,000 people are dead from diseases and famine. The main part of Somalia's agriculture resides around the Juba and Shabelle rivers, which are very unpredictable, especially in the face of global warming. Furthermore, Ethiopia has built dams on the two rivers, restricting water movement and adding to the problems. The Juba and Shabelle originate in Ethiopia and flow south to the capital of Somalia towards the ocean, but is still originated in Ethiopia. And when Ethiopians built dams on it, it restricted the water flow and made Somalia more prone to droughts. The sad part is all of this could have been very easily prevented if the irrigation systems were better. About 70% of Somalians live in extreme poverty. The irrigation systems are poorly constructed and are extremely inefficient and outdated technology. The sad part is that all of this could have been very easily prevented if the irrigation systems were better. About 70% of the Somalians live in extreme poverty. The irrigation systems are poorly constructed and are extremely inefficient and outdated technology. Despite the fact that Somalia uses 99.5% of water for irrigation, a lot is wasted. High soil infiltration rates deem surface irrigation water intensive. When rivers overflood, there are no dams, levees, or canals to prevent water from destroying farmland and spreading disease. Somalia does not have the money or technology to own advanced modern irrigation system. Corruption in the Somalian government makes this worse. However, in a civil war with no end in sight, the agricultural and humanitarian future of Somalia looks bleak. Egypt. In 1960, more than 20% of the children before the age of 5, generally from disease and malnutrition, inflicted disease, famine, contaminated water caused by the Nile River Delta. In Egypt, the number today is less than 1.62%. The Aswan High Dam was built between 1970 to 1980 across the Nile. It is more than 3 kilometers long and 100 meters high. The Aswan Dam was to control the flow of the Nile to prevent flooding and drought. The Aswan High Dam is one of the largest irrigation dams. Thanks to the dam, the unpredictability of the water levels of the Nile decreased, and this supported the growing population of Egypt. Thanks to the Aswan Dam, food stability of Egypt vastly increased. The stability of the Nile resulted in massive reduction of malnutrition and, as a result, child mortality. Today, Egypt counts more than 100 million people and is one of the most developed countries in the world. Although the Aswan Dam created stability in the southern Nile, it created more floods in the upper Nile. As a result, agriculture in Sudan suffered. To minimize the impact on its own country, Ethiopia built a dam on the Nile too. That is a mistake of what I wrote. It's the mountain Nile, which flows into the Nile. Sudan, sandwiched from within, suffered from droughts and floods. This has resulted in political tension between Ethiopia and Egypt, while Sudan is ravaged by civil war. Humans use a lot of water. 4,000,000,000,000,000 cubic meters per year. About 70% of the water is used on irrigation, with India in the first, followed by China and USA. USA has very high consumption per capita, while India and China have low, so this is not a very fair comparison. In many cases, this consumption is not sustainable. In some places, water use and extraction has passed the acceptable levels of sustainability. This is measured in water stress levels. Anything lower than 20% is no stress. Anything more than 100% is critical stress and shows that the water system is unsustainable and will crash. According to some sources, half the irrigation development in the last 50 years was in water-stressed regions. And that is a lot of countries are undergoing critical water stress. Though the world's percentage is 20%, that is a good thing. It is not evenly distributed. Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan are at more than 130%, Saudi Arabia is at 900%, and Kuwait 3,800%. What? Irrigation can cause water resources such as groundwater to disappear. The result is a devastating blow to agriculture. This may not be a problem for the United States or Canada or any developed countries, but most of these, as you have seen in the previous interactive charts, were Northern Africa. Now these countries are very poor and will stimulate massive population growth, and if a critical water crisis happens to them, the result would be civil war, drought, famine, malnutrition, and a whole bunch of other, let's just say, bad things to up to a billion people. Although issues like global warming are being addressed now, another crisis is now beginning to start. A water crisis is stressing water reserves. In the worst-case scenario, droughts could ravage billions. Furthermore, most people are unaware. Just as the struggle against climate change, awareness is required. If no action is taken, effects could be terrible for everyone. If, say, a worst-case scenario happens, global trade will come to a halt, and food will be dispersible, and conflict may spread. To summarize what this video is about, different types of irrigation, analysis of irrigation in different parts of the world, an example of an irrigation disaster and its effects, introduction to the agricultural water crisis in parts of the world.